Live po tayo. Kamusta po? Happy New Year to everyone. Medyo late kami nag-start this year but hopefully we will pick up the speed. No? So thank you very much for joining our latest episode ng Project Pilipinas. Of course, as always, kasama ko si partner in crime, no? Si Mark Gamboa. Kamusta Mark? Naka-periwinkle BTS tayo ngayon. Of course, today meron tayo very special guest.
Very special guest.
Year, no? At malapit na yung official campaign. Malapit na. Pang 1 week na lang. Kasama po namin, senatorial candidate and of course, very well-known human rights lawyer. And I'm sure kung napanood niyo yung mga speech ni Tatay Digong, you would have seen honorable mention of our guest today, no less than Attorney Chel Diokno. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Mark. And hi, everyone who's watching. Thank you for having me.
Maraming salamat po, sir. So today, medyo hopefully within the next hour or so, we have a proper long-form discussion, no? At gusto namin maintindihan talaga ano po yung advocacies nyo, ano po yung specific policy positions or laws you want to pass as a senator. Bakit mahalaga maging senator? Ano bang trabaho ng senator? I think a lot of people do not appreciate as much yung trabaho ng isang senator. But before we go there, gusto namin siguro pag-usapan muna some of the hot button issues recently, no? Maybe to begin with, Attorney Chel, ano pong take nyo dyan sa mga fast talk at saka yung mga presidential interviews, and na-excite na rin ba kayo for Senate interviews and all, hopefully later down the road?
Well, alam nyo, maarangkada na itong darating na kampanya at umiinit na talaga yung mga labanan. I am very excited and I'm looking forward to the coming months. This is going to be the battle of our lives, I think, and we'll have to see how it will unfold.
Attorney, yung no-show ng isang leading candidate, especially dun sa presidential interviews with Jessica Soho, and tagging leading world-class journalists as supposedly biased, is that something that is troubling to you? Is that something that should set off alarm bells, or was it just parang nagdadrama lang yung isang candidate? How do you read that situation?
Well, that should be troubling to him because he really got a lot of flack for that. And you must face the music. You're going to run for the highest position in the land. Dapat talaga makilala ka ng tao at you have to go through the grueling question and answer that all candidates must go through. Alam naman niya yon. He's been through it before. So I don't really understand why they took that kind of position.
And well, speaking of this person, of course, we're talking about former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., si BBM. Of course, the other week, the COMELEC Division 1 was supposed to release some sort of a decision or something regarding dun sa disqualification cases laban sa kanya. But Division 2 suddenly, I think, not many people were expecting it. Nag-release siya ng something that I think the Marcos camp definitely celebrated as a big win. As a lawyer, no? I don't think you're directly involved dun sa mga petitions na yan. Pero anong base niyo dun sa state of play in terms of Commission on Elections petition, yung petition against sa kanya sa Commission on Elections, and how the Commission has been acting upon these petitions? Ano po yung take niyo dun?
Well, ultimately, it's really not the COMELEC that's going to decide this. It's going to be the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Kung baga sa boxing ito, preliminary rounds pa lang yan sa COMELEC. The real fight is going to be in the Supreme Court. And if we look at what has happened so far, the merits have been laid out really, in my opinion, very well before the COMELEC. However, they chose to see it in a different light. Titingnan na lang natin kung yung Supreme Court will agree with them or not.
Paano yan? Because by the way, of course, yung dinicide na is yung cancellation of certificate of candidacy, which is different dun sa ibang petitions na they have to be decided upon because disqualification naman sila. Diba? Because in the case of cancellation, if ever that happened, then tapos ng Marcoses would be out of this race. But in this case, even if he'll get disqualified, pwede pa rin mag-replace, diba? Pwede si Aimee, pwede si even Imelda, right? Just in case. So he cleared some hurdle, but the petitions that are left, my understanding is that the burden of proof for the petitioners is a little bit lower. Parang in a sense, yung sa Division 2 case, parang mas mahirap yata daw yung case na yan for the petitioners. Anong basa niyo? What is your legal assessment of this issue? At least objectively, no, putting aside the politics of this.
Well, you're right, Richard. The biggest consequence of the cancellation of COC would have been that he wouldn't be considered a candidate at all. Therefore, no substitution.
Right.
And that's not the same when it comes to disqualification. In terms of the grounds, although they are related, I would tend to agree with you that the burden is a bit easier when it comes to disqualification than when it comes to cancellation.
And Attorney Chel, what is your read dun sa Division 2? Medyo mahaba-haba eh. Di ba? Yung tapos meron pa yung isa pang supplementary na na release ng isang commissioner diyan. Anong basa mo diyan? Should we read too much into it, or is that just a standard pro forma thing that anong basa niyo diyan?
Well, tingin ko they realized the importance of the case, and they wanted to show na talagang pinag-aralan nila ng maigi yung kaso. Kaya humaba talagang mahaba yung mga opinion nila.
Right.
But like I said earlier, hindi pa naman sila mga justice ng Supreme Court. So, Supreme Court talagang magde-decide niya.
But Attorney Chel, if Division 1 also strikes down the petitions for disqualification, hindi ba dapat tapos ng laban? How does this go to the Supreme Court? I mean, di ba my understanding is it goes to the Supreme Court if, let's say, Division 1, at least the majority there goes against him, right? I mean, why are you seem cautiously hopeful that eventually this will go down to the Supreme Court? Why wouldn't
my
this be shut down?
understanding is that my understanding is that the aggrieved parties, whoever they will be at the end of the COMELEC process,
dadalhin na nila,
will have a chance to go up, to bring it up on certiorari.
And your stance is, because we have some of our good friends and lawyers, I think Attorney Lavinia, for instance, said that this is fundamentally a political question or something like that. And I think some people were saying that maybe Supreme Court will try to kick the can down the road. Anong basa ni John? Does Supreme Court have a mandate on these issues? And is this a Supreme Court that we believe can handle this issue in the best way possible?
Well, I think we have to separate the two. It's both a legal issue and a political issue.
Right.
The issue of the cancellation of a certificate of candidacy or disqualification, legal issue yan. If ever those hurdles are overcome, then the political issue is what will be the will of the people come May 9. And in terms of how the Supreme Court is going to rule on this, it's going to be very difficult to predict. Because in one sense, for example, if it were a Duterte involved instead of a Marcos, then the issue of appointments, where they came from in the court, I think would be more relevant.
Right, poignant. Yeah.
But since it's not as big a factor, or I don't think it would be as big a factor.
Mark, meron kang habol dyan.
Do you think aabot yung sa Supreme Court before the May 9 elections? Kasi may narinig din akong senaryo na if ever ma-disqualify or ma-cancel after ng May 9 elections, yung Vice President-elect ang tataas, ang uupo. So do you think kayang matapos before May 9 lahat ng mga cases na yan?
Depende yan. Narinig ko rin yung scenario yan eh. Nakakaano rin na you have all of these different ways.
It's wild.
Parang wild west tayo pa rin eh. It could, but it really depends on how quickly COMELEC processes the cases.
Looking at the precedents in 2016, yung kay Grace Poe, is that something that is instructive possibly in understanding where this could go? Or you think the two cases are just so dramatically different?
It may relevance naman siya. Kaya lang, you see, a lot also depends on the composition of the court and who is the Chief Justice. And that has changed. Nagpalit na yan eh.
Right, correct.
For example, the Chief Justice says we want this decided quickly, then they will, I think the rest of the court will follow suit.
Right. And Attorney Chel, going back again dun sa Division 2, some critics would say, we're not saying that's the case, that parang they're almost like lawyering for Bongbong Marcos because they were putting too much burden on the petitioners in the sense that parang dapat daw yung Court of Appeals ay made it all the way clear na dapat ma-disqualify yung tao na yan, etc., etc. And by the way, how do you even understand yung Court of Appeals decision back in the day, to uphold the conviction, but to remove the parang some of the significant part of the potential the punishment, right? Parang fines lang, and then parang hindi pa binayaran yung fines. Like for someone looking from outside, this looks like something strange, if not miscarriage of justice, some would say. Yeah.
Yes, nakakapagtaka talaga yan. And that brings me also to one of the issues that I've been pushing for, that we really need to make sure that our justice system operates the same whether you're a big person or just an ordinary Filipino. Because even in my own experience, I've seen it so many times na pagka malaking tao ka, iba ang nagiging treatment natin sa paglilitis ng kaso. We have to put an end to that.
Right. Which brings us to Lolo Narding, right? Which I think is one of the most heart-wrenching things. And personally, I mean, I was really shaken by it for quite some time. Yung images ni Lolo Narding, just humiliated, taken there to the precinct, exposed in the middle of an Omicron pandemic on the grounds of what? 10 kilos of mango, the flimsiest grounds. That was really something that really struck me. And I'm sure for folks who are involved in human rights advocacy, for anyone with some basic conscience, medyo talagang shocking yung nangyari. Kayo po, Attorney Chel, anong base niyo doon sa case na yan? Was it mishandled to begin with? Why it happened to begin with? What should have been done about it? And what is the way forward? Because sadly, I'm sure this is not an isolated case. No? Nagkataon lang na nilabas yung case ni Lolo Narding kaya naging national issue in the way it is. But I'm afraid this is not an isolated case. Anong basa niyo dyan, Attorney?
Well, again, it's a reflection of the double standards of justice in our country. Actually, Lolo Narding didn't even have to post bail. Because way back, we have a recognizance law that was passed in 2012 that he could have availed of. Kaya lang, when I revisited the law, when this incident happened, I realized, kasi I was wondering, why did they have to post bail? And when I looked at the law, I realized, ang daming mga requirement. It would have taken him days, if not weeks, in detention before he could have gotten out on recognizance. Given the conditions of jails in our country, you want to get out as quickly as possible. We have a jail congestion rate of like 415% per ACOA report.
And 2,000% in some places.
Yes, and we are in the top 5 in the world in terms of overcrowding of jails. So most of the people in our jails are not convicted. They are
pre-trial detainees.
Yeah, pre-trial detainees.
63%, I saw one number at least.
They have to suffer the inhumanity of the jail conditions, even when they have a presumption they're presumed innocent under the law. That's something we must also address.
Mark, meron kang tanong kay Lolo Narding kasi kinonect din yan kay Imelda, di ba? Yung anong sinabi ni Senator Ping? A tale of two thieves ba? Yung sinabi niya.
Kaya nga na kapag sa mga mayayaman or sa well-connected or sa family ng politicians, nakakaalis or hindi hinuhuli, pero pagdating dito sa simpleng mamamayan, ang bilis na huliin ka agad. And pagdating dun sa gravity ng kanilang ginawa, ang layo naman.
$10 billion yung accusation sa isa, 10 kilos of mango, diba? Yes, Attorney Chel.
Yes, and ganun din yung nakita natin sa under this pandemic, yung lockdown. According to the PNP itself, for the year 2020 alone, more than 500,000 Filipinos were arrested and processed as criminals for violating quarantine rules. There was a case we monitored. Tatay siya, lumabas siya ng bahay dahil gutom yung kanyang mga anak. Hindi niya namalayan, na pala, curfew. He was arrested. It took him 37 days to return to his family. And to me, that's really, nasa pandemya na nga tayo, hirap na nga ng tao, gaganunin mo pa sila. And my own take there is the government should require that the penalty should only be community service. We have such a congested jails already, tapos dadagdagan mo pa ng quarantine violator na hindi naman criminal yung mga yan. So they should only be given community service as a penalty.
And Attorney Chel, of course, you were also involved in helping some of the netizens who failed NBI cases back in 2020, right? But ako nga tinithreaten ng some of the trolls na pa-NBI niyan si Darian, di ba? Because I pointed out some of the issues with the Chinese test kits, among others. And then, of course, meron tayong anti-terror law na yan. What is the state of play there? How worrying is the situation? Or is there a chance that we can make sure na hindi ito maabuso? Potential loopholes dito sa anti-terror law na yan. Anong stance niyo dyan, attorney?
It's really a big problem, especially when you have a government that tends, it has a very strong authoritarian bent. Kasi yun the issues, whenever you have a government like that, the first thing they will attack is the freedom of speech. And connected, of course, with that is the right to liberty.
Right.
And yun yung nakita natin under this administration. Yung mga netizens na nagpo-post lang sa Facebook, biglang pinupuntahan sa bahay, hinuhuli na walang warrant, sinasampahan ng inciting to sedition. Clearly, that was intended to create a chilling effect on the other people who go online and who express their opinions. It was really not against the two individuals. And if you look at it, when their cases reached the courts, the judges did not hesitate to throw them out. So sa akin, ang purpose nun, really, they didn't really care about getting a prosecution or conviction. They just wanted to put a scare on people.
Yeah, parang chilling effect. I think that's the term been used, yung chilling effect. Ikaw, Mark, I mean, you're a blogger and you're quite active on that. Anong basa mo dun sa mga issues na yan? Is there a question you have also for Chel on that?
Ang gusto ko lang din itanong kay Attorney Chel, where do you stand doon sa pagdating sa mga trolls and sa mga fake news? How do you balance it, of course, doon sa ating cyber libel na batas? And how can we solve yung problema natin sa social media? Of course, without violating yung human rights and freedom of speech ng mga kababayan po natin online.
Yeah, is there a democratic way to regulate? I mean, I don't even know if the term regulate is proper. Kasi meron naman tayong libel law, cyber libel, etc.
How do you balance?
Yeah, we have all these disinformation networks which are poisoning the wellspring of democracy, right? Democratic discourse. Anong stance niya, Attorney Chel?
Well, first of all, when it comes to libel, I have long been pushing that we decriminalize libel, that it becomes civil liability only. May malaki pa rin deterrent yan, and you have to pay out of your own pocket if you libel somebody. That's how it's done in so many countries. When it comes to trolls and fake news, I think we must find a way to hold the social media platform owners accountable, because it's their algorithms that promote that.
Right.
Now, Maria Ressa I monitored one of her proposals recently where she said there should be legislation that will hold them responsible. So I've been looking lately at an old law. We actually have a law on that in the revised penal code.
Right.
It was written way back. They never even imagined we would have an internet. It punishes the dissemination of false news. They don't call it fake news.
Right.
False news that undermines the public interest, something like that. I'm looking at how we can recraft that law,
right,
amend it, so that social media platform owners will be held responsible.
Oh, kasi
pero pero how will that na naman? Paano naman po siya in a way na baka naman ma-weaponize or gamitin naman nung if ever kunyari kung sino nasa administration to go after yung mga nag-reveal ng mga secrets nila or nagbubunyag ng mga hindi maganda nilang ginagawa. So paano naman po on that side naman? How do we protect naman our netizens?
Kasi public interest medyo pwede fuzzy yung definition, di ba? Ng government.
As presently worded, hindi that can happen. Kaya tinitingnan ko na yung paano natin iti-tweak yung language ng provision na yon. And also expressly rule out or exclude journalists.
Right.
Di ba? Yung
pero how do we define journalists? Kasi ngayon medyo contested na yun
well, you know, we can look at the instruments of the United Nations kasi magaganda yung mga instruments doon, which do discuss as well trolls and fake news. Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, Attorney Chel, let's go a little bit back. No, of course, your joke, no, right? I mean, your family, your clan, whatever you want to call it, has made huge contributions to the country. One of course, the jokes were our professors in economics, among others. So you're quite a familiar staple in Philippine politics. But of course, your father, in particular, played a very, very important role in institutionalizing and advocating for human rights. And dun po yung statue niya sa Commission on Human Rights when you go there. Tell us a little bit about that, about your father's struggles during martial law period and beyond, and how that has informed your own personal journey, right? And now your decision na sumabak po kayo sa politika, which is a very, very difficult arena of participation. Yes.
Well, thank you for remembering him. It's actually going to be his 100th birth anniversary on February 26th. So we have... Yeah, we have some events lined up. We now have a 100 masses for Kapepe. So there are masses being done in so many different parts of the country in different churches. So baka kung meron din na gusto mag-sponsor ng misa, please, the family would really appreciate it. You know, my dad was my role model as a child, and he really was the one who influenced me and made me decide to do what I'm doing today. Before martial law was declared, he was a very highly respected senator. Every year, was it Free Press ba? They would say who would be the top senators, and he was one of those who was always there in the top. He was also a highly respected lawyer. When martial law was declared, soldiers suddenly came to our house, took him without a warrant. They invited him, quote unquote, to the military camp and detained him for 2 years without any legal reason at all. Walang warrant, walang kaso, walang dahilan.
You remember this, Attorney Chel?
Vividly.
Very vividly, no? Oh.
Yes, I was 11 years old at that time. I was playing hooky. I was supposed to be asleep na, but because my sisters had some friends over, I was also up. And it must have been close to midnight maybe around 11 o'clock, when a whole group of armed soldiers came to the house, knocked on the door, and demanded to see my dad. When he came down and spoke to them, they gave him the invitation, and he said, "Is this an invitation I can refuse?" And the colonel said, "I'm sorry, sir, but you have to come with us." When he was released after 2 years, he really turned his back on politics. He never ran for any position until he passed on in 1987. Instead, he dedicated his life to helping victims of abuse, victims of human rights violations. I was 13 when he was released, and I knew I was going to be a lawyer already at that age. I would go with him. So pag may hearing siya sa mga military courts, ako nagdadala ng bag niya, nakasuot din ako ng polo barong. And every summer, I would clerk in his law office. So he was my mentor, my role model, my inspiration. And the legacy he left really was one of the rule of law, of human rights, and of how to be a statesman in government.
Kapepe, di ba Justice Secretary din si Kapepe at one point? Wasn't he also the
Yes.
Yes, so he had a background talaga in dealing with this issue at the highest level of government, right? Aside from his work in Senate.
That's what rocketed him to fame in the early part of his career, because he was appointed by then President Macapagal,
yes, correct,
Secretary of Justice. He began an investigation that led to Harry Stonehill,
right,
who was then exposed in terms of issues of tax and smuggling.
Right.
And the trail led all the way to the palace. But before it could reach there, Stonehill was deported.
Yeah.
And then my father's, according to the administration, resigned, and his resignation was accepted when he never actually resigned. So he was booted out.
Right.
And
he exposed the networks of corruption and
yes,
inside the system. And of course, the Americans back then had very much influence on it. By the way, Kapepe, just to clarify, kasi kami sa North, mga Ilocano, they always say Marcos was such a genius, blah, 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 nag-aral lang sa preso, naging top-notcher. But I know for a fact that Kapepe, he taught both accounting at saka even law school, right? I mean, the bar, I'm sorry. Without really going through the training full on. I mean, that's insane. Can you tell us about it? I'm not saying na payabang ka, but that was an incredible human feat, no, I would say, in terms of his achievements, right?
Yes, he topped the CPA, and
Right.
then because of the war was not able to complete his law studies. He only got to reach, if I'm not mistaken, up to second year. At that time he was mentored by his father, my grandfather,
Right,
who
right.
was also a lawyer, and was given permission by the court after the World War II to take the bar, even if he had not completed his entire legal
Right.
education. And he topped the bar. He tied with Senator Salonga, Joby Salonga.
Exactly, which is incredible, right? Because there's all this myth and discussion about how Marcos was this genius and all. And then I was researching, it's like, wow, Kapepe, no one has done that, top both the CPA and bar, and without even finishing law school. I mean, that's an incredible feat, right? And kaya nga, kasi for me, mahalaga na yung mga role models na yan. Kasi for Filipinos, they get impressed, right? When we pull off something like that. And I feel yung part na yan ng legacy ni Kapepe should be emphasized more so that people know we have had really, really great statesmen in our history na nakasabay din ni Marcos for some reason. Mark, do you have a question on Kapepe before we transition about how that's informing his advocacy now, si Chel?
So, yung dun po sa time niya as a senator, ano yung mga like mga laws and mga naipasa po niya na mga batas na talagang nagmarka sa inyo, or na you find na talagang some of his best work as a senator?
Right.
Because of his background as well in as a CPA,
Right.
he was one of those who pushed the omnibus investments law, financial incentives, and related types of laws. But he was actually involved in a lot of different kinds of legislation, also for social legislation. Kaya what's unfortunate is although I was able to keep his legal records, when he was arrested, all his entire Senate records, the bills he sponsored, lahat were taken. And despite our efforts to try to get them afterward, we were never able to locate them. Kaya yung ibang mga sinulong niya mga bill nun, yung legislation, wala kaming records ngayon.
Oh. So ang nangyari doon is they essentially wanted to erase the persons. Parang medyo parang Chinese style na if you run afoul, they'll try to take you out of the whole record and everything, right? Parang grabe yun, ha?
What's ironic is that he does have an intelligence record. In other words, by the intelligence. Right. And even I was informed by someone who I know from that field.
Sector, yes.
Even I have one. Kasi when we were children visiting him, we were required to be photographed. Parang mga convict yung may pangalan.
Right.
And I was informed in around 1990s that those records are still there. Nandun pa raw. Wow. Yung mga records pati namin. Ina-update pa nga raw, sabi sa akin.
Sikat talaga kayo eh. Talagang mga notorious pala kayo sa mga Intel people eh. And Attorney Chel, can you tell us a little bit about, maybe a little bit more than a little bit, kamusta yung martial law period? I mean, for an average Filipino, what would have it felt? Kasi I think a lot of us, we are yet to have proper conversation with our parents about this. I think hanggang ngayon parang some people are just beginning to open up. May iba na nag-aaway na yung mga younger generation, older generation. And then meron din yung phenomena na tinatawag ng mga, alam mo yung mga Tito Fortuner or Tito Montero. Ay, panahon ni Marcos, may disiplina. May mga ganun. But kayo po, from your understanding, kasi your father was involved in grassroots, really helping people on the ground. I'm sure you were with him along the way. Ano yung experience ng karanasan ng isang average Filipino during the time of martial law and when it officially ended but was really still a dictatorship? Yeah.
Well, anak ako ng martial law. I was 11 years old when it was declared and 25 when the Marcoses fled Malacanang. And I'd say this to all the young people who ask me. I tell them you would not have enjoyed that time. Kasi bawal lahat nun. Bawal ang student council, bawal magtipon-tipon, bawal maglabas ng hinaing sa pamahalaan, bawal magbatikos. Yung lahat ng balita noon, kontrolado ng Ministry of Information. Everything was censored. And they would even be the one to bring out fake news. So it was centralized in the government. So every freedom that we enjoy today and sometimes even take for granted. We had none of that during martial law.
And economically, kamusta naman yung living standards ng tao? Yung kamusta yung Nutriban, di ba? Proud na proud sila dun sa magiging Singapore daw tayo kung sana hindi pinali si yung tatay niya. What was the economic conditions on the ground from what you remember?
Well, the first 2 years of martial law, nung talagang yung iron grip was there, okay naman yung quality of life nung una, but it soon deteriorated. Yeah. And by the 1980s, we were already a losing economy, right, especially when you compare us with our neighboring countries. Talagang we lost, according to the studies, let's say, of sila JC Punong Bayan, right. We lost like a decade of development during that time. Sure, there were golden years, but not for the country. It was the golden years for the Marcoses.
Yeah. And so sinasabi nila, I mean, a baby daw sila nung panahon ng martial law. Can you tell us, anong basa niyo nun? Did you think back then na the Marcoses are here forever? Are there like kind of a monarchy at parang crown prince pa si Bongbong? Ganun ba yung thinking niyo nun when it comes to trying to understand the future of the country? Had there not been a revolution or a toppling of the regime?
How old is Bongbong? I think he must be about my age. Or maybe
64, right? 64.
But then he's older than I am. They were not babies then. If at my age, if at the age of 11 I could already understand what was happening, I am sure kung mga 14, 15 na sila, lalo pa sila, na alam nila yung nangyayari. Right. Now, how did it feel at that time? I went through so many stages of extreme emotion. My father was in jail. I was angry. I was frustrated. There was a point where I pretty much had lost all hope, and I thought that they would last forever. That's why when they were finally when the regime collapsed, I was one of the happiest persons in the world, and I never ever imagined that we would go back to a situation where our freedoms would be under attack like that time. And that's why when it started to happen again here, that's the time that I said, hindi ko na kayang manahimik lang.
Right.
I have to do something about it.
And Attorney Chel, your father passed on more or less the process of transition, right? We're talking about transitioning to a new regime. In retrospect, or maybe compared dun sa impression mo nung una and then in retrospect, what went right, what went wrong in the transition from the Marcos regime to the post-Marcos EDSA regime? Because many people are saying na mukhang there are some systemic structural problems and we're now beginning to pay a price for it. Baka may pagkakulang in terms of ensuring we'll have robust political parties, baka may loopholes dun sa saligang batas na pwede natin amendahan, or there were certain political decisions that perhaps did not help to bring about and the full fruition nung promise ng EDSA. Ako, ang basa ko talaga, what's happening right now is counter-revolution by the Marcoses. So there is a weakness for me, some inherent weakness with the legal architecture and also the political arrangements and alignments that were made after the collapse of Marcos, and hence we're paying the price. But that's my reading. Gusto kong maintindihan yung reading nyo, Attorney Chel, as someone whose father was very much in the process of resistance, and I'm sure you said you were so happy when Marcos left. But really in politics, what matters is the day after, right? The day after, after the euphoria, anong gagawin mo to make sure na the dark days will not come back? Can you tell us a little bit about your take on that? Yeah.
Well, you know what was never fully addressed after the regime collapsed was the justice system.
Right.
And this is one aspect of martial law that is hardly ever even talked about. Marcos passed 1 week after he declared martial law, he issued letter of instruction number 11, requiring all members of the judiciary to submit letters of resignation. Hawak-hawak lang ni Marcos yon. The minute he heard about you coming out with the ruling that was against his government, all he had to do was accept your resignation. So by that one instruction, he stripped the judiciary of its independence. Hindi siya nakontento doon. About 4 months later, he changed the constitution, and in the 1973 constitution, he inserted a provision that said that all members of the courts up to the Supreme Court will remain until their age of retirement unless he decrees otherwise. Sa Constitution yon. What was the effect of that? For 14 years, the Marcoses owned every single judge in the entire country. Justice was no longer independent. They controlled it. Imagine what was the effect on the legal profession.
Right.
You're a lawyer, you're a law firm, you want to get the biggest clients. Kailangan dikit ka sa Malacanang. Kasi pag dikit ka sa Malacanang, siguradong panalo ka sa kaso mo.
Panalo.
So what did some of the lawyers do? They created networks with the Malacanang, networks with companies, networks with jail officials, police, etc. Unfortunately, those networks were never dismantled, and some of them still operate today.
Right.
And that's why there are two kinds of lawyers in our country today. Lawyers who really fight cases on the merits, and lawyers who just fix cases. That's the way. That's the reality. And you can lay the blame on the Marcos dictatorship. Sila ang nag-create ng ganun klaseng justice system. Unfortunately, that was never addressed by succeeding administration.
Bakit, Attorney Chel? Was it lack of political will? Was it lack of appreciation of the gravity of the problem, combination of them? Can you tell us a little about that?
To give credit to the Cory Aquino administration, they did try. Number one, they created a commission, if I'm not mistaken, or a group that really went over who were the judges and removed a lot of the judges who really weren't fit to sit. Unfortunately, only within a matter of less than a decade, some of those judges were still able to get back. And they also tried to go after the lawyers who did the layering of corporations for the Marcoses. Unfortunately, again, the Supreme Court, in the case of the Regala case, said that lawyers enjoy lawyer-client privilege, and therefore, strangely enough, the conclusion is they cannot be sued by the PCGG, which to me is parang ang layo nun, dalawang bagay na yun. But that became a Supreme Court decision. That became the obstacle to going after them. Succeeding administrations never, in effect, neglected the strengthening of the justice system. For a long time, we had 30% vacancy among judges. Imagine, 1/3 of our judges' positions were vacant for many years. It's only in around 2010 that the salaries and benefits were increased, so that right now we only have around 20% vacancies. But imagine, 20% is still a lot. That is 1 out of every 5 trial courts that has no judge. So people wonder, bakit ang bagal ng mga kaso sa atin? The main reason is because we lack judges. We also lack prosecutors. We have a vacancy rate of like 34% for our prosecutors. Kaya if our justice system was a hospital, kulang ka ng doktor, kulang ka ng nurse, araw-araw may bagong pasyente pumapasok, hindi mo talaga makakayanan magdispensa ng hustisya.
Is this an issue of underinvestment? I'm sure Mark will come on this issue too. I mean, I saw numbers like a single judge has to handle 644 cases a year at least. I mean, grabe yung overwhelmed talaga yung mga nandyan sa judiciary, and like the budget of judiciary is barely 1% of the national budget, the fiscal allocation of the government. Ano yan? Is this also a cultural issue na parang wala tayong culture of appreciation of capacity building in the judicial institution? Ano po yung understanding niyo dyan sa issue na yan?
It's a combination of factors. Some of those are the ones you mentioned, but there's one very big factor that must also be considered. It's the fact that only one person appoints all the judges and prosecutors.
Exactly, yeah. The power. Yes.
So isipin natin there are over 1,000 courts. There are, I don't know how many thousand prosecutor positions. Nag-uunahan silang lahat para yung papeles nila ay umabot sa Malacanang at yung papeles na yun ay mailagay sa ibabaw. That's why, as way back, when I was working in the Senate in the Blue Ribbon Committee, way back in 2001, I would receive visits from lawyers from the provinces, and they would ask me, "Can you be my backer?" And I'm like, "Why? What do you mean backer? Kailangan ko kasi ng backer kasi nagpapa-appoint ako sa judiciary." And
Yeah.
I'm like, bakit? Kung wala akong backer, hindi ako ma-appoint. And I'm like, lawyer lang naman ako dito, and they'll say, ay hindi naman talaga kayo, yung kailangan namin, yung mga senador, ang mga
yung
backer, yung mga ganon. But that was already a phenomenon early 2000, and it hasn't changed.
Yeah, yun nga, Attorney Chel, kasi I raised that issue also, for instance, in Supreme Court. In the US, we know dadaan ka sa Senate, no? I mean, I was there in DC when Kavanaugh appointment was such a big issue, so it was huge drama. But dito sa Pilipinas, parang the process is far more seamless, right? I mean, halos lahat ng na-appoint na ni Duterte yung magiging occupant ng Supreme Court, similar a little bit with Arroyo. So there's no institutional, I would say, filtering na nangyari sa US whereby the legislature can have a say. What is the model or what new mechanisms you think na dapat ma-establish natin para maayos itong problema ng appointment issue?
I think we should do something similar to what's being done in the States. And actually, that's how it was before martial law.
Right.
Before martial law, yung mga na-nominate sa judiciary, dumadaan ng commission on appointments yan. So public hearing, talagang dadaan ka sa butas ng karayom. Unfortunately, although the intention was good, when we ratified the 1987 Constitution, we created a different body, the Judicial and Bar Council.
Right.
And while the purpose was really to remove politics from the process of appointment, it hasn't happened.
Right.
And it's really, it has not achieved its intended purpose.
Right. So the intention was good para hindi magiging circus yung appointments issue, right? But in the process, you also removed potential necessary filter and public scrutiny na dapat kailangan, lalong-lalo na for Supreme Court justices, di ba? Ikaw, Mark, anong basa mo dyan? I mean, anong understanding mo dyan sa issue ng judiciary natin at saka yung problema sa mga korte, etc. Kasi ikaw...
Parati ko sinasabi dito sa mga episodes natin na a lot of our problems diyan naka-root, it goes back sa justice system eh. Like for example, yung corruption, 'di ba? Like sa election, yung mga vote buying na yan, for example, 'di ba? Kasi walang nakakasuhan, walang nakukulong, So ang tanong ko po, Attorney Chel, if ever you win a seat sa Senate, how do we start to solve that? How do we take the money out sa ating justice system na hindi po ang term nga nila ay pera-pera? Paano po ang mga solusyon na pwede po nating gawin?
Yeah.
Ang gusto ko sanang isulong ay isang batas na ililipat natin yung mga kasong pera-pera lang, yung mga kaso ng mga negosyante halimbawa, sa arbitration. May precedent na tayo dyan. We've been doing it for decades already in the construction industry. All we need to do is to expand that to cover business disputes. What's the advantage of arbitration? Unang-una, mabilis. I have handled several cases in the construction industry. 1 to 2 years, tapos na lahat. The whole case, hanggang appeal, tapos na lahat. Second, you cannot say the bias yung judge o yung nabili yung judge sa arbitration because the ones who decide who will be the judge, yung namimili ng judge, yung mismo nag-aaway na panig. So they cannot say bias yung judge kasi sila ang pumili eh.
Right.
Third, pag maalis natin sa court yung mga kasong pera-pera lang, mawawala yung malaking temptation for corruption. And fourth, pag maalis natin yung mga kasong yan, mababawasan ngayon yung court docket nila, which will give them the time they need to pay attention to the ordinary people's cases, criminal cases especially. Yeah. So yun ang ika. The other thing I want to do is to strengthen our barangay justice system. Maganda sana yung mga barangay justice natin eh. Nasa local government code yan, yung mga lupang taga-pamayapa, pangkat taga-pagkasundo. Their purpose is pag nag-away yung magka-barangay o magka-syudad ay...
Like Lolo Narding, di ba? I mean, that could have been resolved at the barangay level, di ba?
Yung magkasundo na yung mga panig, doon pa lang sa barangay para hindi na umabot yung kaso sa court. What's the problem? Although the mechanism is there, they aren't empowered. They don't have the training. They don't have access to a lawyer. They don't have the resources and even compensation. So ang isa kong gusto mangyari ay ma-amendahan natin yung batas dyan. what I would like to happen is that dapat may libreng serbisyong legal sa bawat baryo. So we can amend the composition of the lupong to include a lawyer who will provide assistance to all the arbitrators there, and also accept questions and consultation from the residents. So why am I doing itong proposal ko nanggaling sa experience ko. In April of this year, I opened the free legal help desk on my Facebook page because so many people were sending in legal queries. I created a team of young lawyers to help me. You know, in the span of 6 months, we received almost 20,000 questions from ordinary people. They did not have access to a lawyer. Wala silang makausap na abogado kasi ang laki daw ng bayad, ang hirap hanapin, etc. etc. So sana mangyari na magkaroon tayo ng libreng ganon consultation
on the barangay level.
Barangay.
Grassroots talaga.
You know, not everyone naman who needs to talk to a lawyer needs a lawyer. Sometimes all they need to do is, paano ko ba ipoprocess yung inheritance, yung iniwan na lupa ng aking ama na namatay? So it's only if they really need legal representation, then we created a system where we would refer them. So you're a victim of a sexual offense, you really need a lawyer, i-refer namin sila sa appropriate na lawyer or law organization.
So parang the goal po is to bawasan yung pong mga kaso, yung mga cases na nandun sa ating mga korte at yung mga lesser ones ay ma-solve na po on a barangay level or arbitration. So yun po so we can focus doon sa mga mahalagang mga kaso talaga, mga criminal cases talaga. So parang ganun po yung point.
Then going back to the case of Lolo Narding naman, meron din akong gustong i-push na law. I call it the Alternative Penalties Act. Kasi nga, we have just too many people in jail. We should start allowing punishments like community service,
like in the US, right?
Yung home detention, nalalagyan ka ng electronic monitoring instead of spending your sentence in jail. Yung mga tinatawag na suspended sentence on the condition that you do not commit any other crime. Wala kasi tayong mga ganun sa batas natin. So these are being done in other countries. It's time that we adopt some of them here.
Right. Richard, may tanong din ako kay Attorney Chel. What are your thoughts naman, Attorney? I won't name na lang any names, pero yung parang television na style ng justice na yung mga kababayan natin na na dumudulog sa mga television personalities, mga show sa TV, para po mabilisan, parang ganun minsan yung nangyayari. So what are your thoughts doon sa mga ganun?
O kasi baka maging colleague niyo yung isa dyan. Just
well, that phenomenon is not only here in our country. That has also happened in some other countries, particularly in in South America. May mga ganyan din. It really is a reflection of the fact that people have lost confidence in our justice system. Na hindi mo na maasahan yung dapat mong maasahan, kaya pupunta ka na lang sa mga nasa media. And rather than strengthening justice, what it does is it creates sort of an illusion that there is justice when actually it really doesn't happen. Kaya if you're talking about how do we address the problem of justice for the ordinary Filipino, that's not the right way to go. We must go straight to the core of the problem and fix the justice system itself. Once we restore people's confidence, they will not have to go to those lengths to get justice anymore.
Attorney Chel, can you tell us a little bit more about this, yung issue ng rule of law? Kasi I think hindi naintindihan ng maraming tao, hindi na-appreciate ano ibig sabihin ng rule of law. And I wanted to relate that also to what President Duterte represents, which in among academics we call it penal populism, no? Yung parang dirty Harry type na parang ako nang bahala, i-shortcut ko na yan, di ba? In short, vigilante justice, right? Can you explain to us ano ba talaga yung ideal situation? What is rule of law and in what way is that and pwede i-juxtapose yan dun sa nire-represent ni Pangulong Duterte? Because let's accept it, for some reason bumenta talaga yung penal populism ni Pangulong Duterte and his popularity is still high. So for some reason something is going on there, no? So siguro the frustration levels are very high. And let me just add on this, Attorney Chel, no? Because if you look at the surveys, SWS, for instance, says that like 7 out of 10 Filipinos supported the drug war. And yet 9 out of 10 didn't want the suspects to, to face extrajudicial killings or anything like that. And yet parang walang masyadong nangyaring outrage. I mean, for me, I think in any other country, I can think about Latin America even or something. If there were thousands of extrajudicial killings, I could have imagined hundreds of thousands or millions coming out on the streets. I'll just be honest about it. Yun ang basa ko. Even if there's a climate of fear and everything like that. But it didn't happen in the Philippines for some reason. And I don't want to make it a morality question or something like that. But I want us to properly understand it. And kayo po bilang isang human rights lawyer, how do you understand that phenomenon? Na mukhang there was no outrage, or I would say proportionate expression of discontent or outrage, despite the reports of tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings in the past few years. And then relate that to the rule of law issue, of course.
I think one of the reasons why people were willing to not be outraged was the fact that they really had no confidence at all in the justice system. I myself had several conversations with a number of people who told me, mabuti pa nga na ganyan na nangyari dyan. Kasi kung dinaan natin sa korte yan, makakalusot lang yan. Maglalagay lang siya, babayaran lang niya yung mga witness na hindi dumating o babayaran niya yung judge at makakalusot siya. So that's, I think, one of the big reasons why people were saying, sige na lang, hayaan mo na lang. Basta hindi kami ang tamaan. Then that accounts for the survey na that where so many people were afraid na that we don't want to be the victims of the EJ case. What people were missing, I think, or not realizing was the fact that once you allow that to happen, then you create exemptions to the law. When the basic purpose and the basic underpinning of any legal system has to be that no one is above the law. Kasi once you start saying, oh yeah, mga drug addict, pwede nang patayin yan. Then ngayon, meron ka ng category ng tao na hindi na kailangan idaan sa korte. Wala nang due process. Hindi mo na kailangan mag-ipatunayan na talagang sila yung guilty. And once you create those categories, it's so easy to ram an entire bus or a truck through those categories so that even people who have nothing to do with drugs get killed. And even people who are totally innocent, in fact, tumutulong pa nga sa iba ay doon na lang dinadaan na rin sa EJK sila dahil for one reason or another, the government doesn't like them or some people in authority don't like them. When the basic meaning of rule of law is really that. No one should be above the law. And that's one of the concepts that I think maybe our generation failed to bring down and make a lot the ordinary person understand the importance of that concept. Okay. In other countries, ano yun tanggap nila yun Kaya
internalized na siya internalized na siya. So
kulang sa appreciation.
Yeah, Attorney Chel, how do you I don't want to use the term mainstream because it's a mainstream in a formal legal sense, but how do you make sure na internalize at ma-appreciate ng publiko itong mga values like human rights, rule of law, among other things? I had some conversation with former Supreme Court Chief Justice Sereno on this, and she was saying that sometimes you can use yung mga issues like yung mga away sa loob ng family at pag unfair na yung punishment ng parents, yung parang you feel violated. So human rights is something like that. So kayo po bilang isang public figure and also a public human rights lawyer, paano po natin matulungan yung ating kababayan na ma-appreciate itong mga fundamental principles of human rights and rule of law?
Dapat isama natin yan sa basic education natin, sa curriculum, so that even in the formative stages of life, the ordinary Filipino gets to understand why rule of law is important, why human rights are important. And I think we should also include voter education as well, para malaman nila yung kahalagahan ng kanilang boto at dapat wag ibebenta. It has to be addressed at that young age because if you target only people who are already adult, form na yung brains niyan. They have some of them already have very rigid ways of thinking. So we need to catch it when they're still young.
Nip it in the bud kung any wrong ideas just in case. So now, Attorney Chel, we're going to the latter part, the finalizing part of our interview. I'm sure you're very busy now. Now, what I want to understand is this. Syempre, dun sa case ng father niyo po, he was very much involved in government at the highest levels, but later on he decided to go full civil society, right? Parang in your case, it's going the opposite, di ba? Parang you're in the academe, you're in the civil society, pero nag-decide po kayo noong 2019 na sumabak sa politika. At alam natin na ang politika sa Pilipinas, it's really hindi lang circus eh. Grabing talagang nangyari, lalong in the past few years since President Duterte has come to power. What gave you the courage, audacity, or the sense of purpose and sense of urgency na kailangan directly sumabak kayo sa politika? And if you also have an advice for other people who have good intentions but for some reason they want to keep away from politics, why should you get your hands dirty in that sense, no? By entering this arena of extreme competition and circus-like in dynamics?
I had several reasons that really pushed me to make that decision. Number one, it came to a point in my being a lawyer and a human rights defender that I realized that the problems of the justice system could not be addressed by fighting it out in court, in individual cases, kasi systemic na yung flaws eh. And if you want to fix those flaws, you have to have a hand in how government operates. You have to have a say in how laws are passed and how laws should be implemented. That's one. The second is, I was already very comfortable as a teacher, as someone fighting for victims of abuse, as a human rights defender, as a educator. Okay na ako, masaya na ako doon. But when I realized that the very democracy that we were operating in was under siege, it came to a point where I said, hindi na ako pwede manahimik. If I will be complicit if I just don't get involved. Right. And how can I complain about what's happening if I'm not willing to put my own person up there and say that I complain about politicians, then do something about it. O di ibig sabihin, you should also be ready to get involved. Yeah. And that's what led me into this arena of politics.
And Attorney Chel, of course, you got a lot of traction lalo dun sa mga TikTok mo, and si Mark parati niya mention na.
Yun ako magtatanong.
Go,
kasi
Mark.
ito, I always mention pag I mention you sa aking channel, parati kong pinupuri yung inyong naging TikTok strategy. And kasi isa kayo sa mga una who are very active in TikTok. And look what's happening now. 'Di ba? A lot of yung mga misinformation, yung mga sa TikTok binubuhos. So you were right. You were right na to start early doon sa TikTok and doon makilala. So can you tell us more what made you decide to go into this? Sino ang nagturo sa inyo doon sa TikTok, and paano yung naging buong process nun?
Well, it was really ano sabi nila, necessity is the mother of invention.
Desperation.
when a person's resources are limited, you look for all the different ways that you can get your message delivered in a way that you can do it without having to spend a lot. Kasi talaga naman hindi ako tulad ng ibang mga kandidato na sobrang dami yung pera nila. And we were already doing a lot of social media before, and it occurred to us, sabi namin, why not try TikTok? And when we first started talking about it, sabi ko, ang laking challenge niyan kasi you have to be able to deliver a message in a really short period of time. But I said, sige, why not? Subukan natin. At least it will also expand my own abilities. So we tried, we did a few, and when it came out okay, we continued to do that. I have a very young team. The two of the vital cogs in my team are my two sons. My eldest son, Pepe, is a film director.
Right, exactly.
My other, the son next to him in age, is really good in terms of social media platforms. Right. So I listen to them a lot talaga.
And ano yung kay Vice Ganda? Was that yung duet niyo with Vice Ganda? What was that? Paano yan? Was that
Ano
spontaneous?
yun ha?
Ano nangyari doon?
Totally organic yun. Nanggaling
Totally organic. Yeah, hindi ito
At
troll farm.
again, maraming salamat, Vice. Nako, we never expected it, but we really appreciate it. We're so thankful.
Yes. So, yun nga Attorney Chel, you had very high conversion rate in 2019, no? So parang as your awareness went high, your numbers were also picking up. So I mean, I always argued you had the biggest potential among the opposition Senate candidates in 2019. What lessons you learned from 2019 that you want to apply now to these elections, and why do you feel these elections provides perhaps more chances for a progressive candidate like you to make it to the Senate, which is quite a competitive race actually this year, no? And if you can also tell us a little bit about what was the experience of campaigning in the time of Duterte? Was that different from what you understand from other election campaigns? Iba ba? Is our elections as really as competitive and democratic as it's supposed to be? Can you tell us a little bit about that, Attorney Chel?
What lessons did I learn? Basically everything. I was a total newbie in 2019. Talagang I'll be the first to admit I knew next to nothing about politics. But at the same time, I also consider myself a fast learner.
Right.
What we lacked pretty much everything in 2019. We didn't have a network on the ground. We started late. We had the best, I think, feature that we had was we had very consistent messaging. And very good messaging. So tinuloy namin yun, pero in-expand namin, and I'm very happy to report that we have a very good ground network now. And I have so many volunteers. Umabot na kami ng 15,000 more or less who have signed up as my volunteers all over the country. So we have organized them. I meet them regularly online. Whenever I have a chance, when I go out on sorties, basta't pwede mag-sortie, I make it a point to meet with them separately from the events I have. And aside from that, I also have a really great team. So all of this has led me to be much more optimistic, and I believe more capable this time around than 2019.
Mark, may tanong ka ba dyan dun sa mga campaign strategy ni Attorney Chel?
Yun nga, how do you make up doon sa like yung layo ng budget ng mga, alam naman natin yung mga ibang tumatakbo, yung kanilang television budget na lang runs hundreds and millions.
Air war. Yung sa air war.
Air war. So how do you counter that? Paano nyo po planong para to make up ground doon sa kakulangan sa budget pagdating po sa mga ganun?
Well, I intend to do triple and quadruple time. Kasi yung tendency ng may malalaking budget, they're very complacent. Right. They'll try to let their money do all the work for them. Since I don't have that, it's got to be my own effort and the efforts of my volunteers and my team. And we are all ready, we're all willing to get it on. Come next week, ano na yan? February is really it.
Yes.
When we started everything.
Lapit na. May question din ako, Attorney Chel. Kasi syempre, alam natin, we always talk about na we all have our own echo chambers, di ba? Minsan, nakakausap natin, puro yung mga same ideas natin, same party natin. Pero ito yung tatanong ko sa inyo, Attorney Chel. For example, kung may nanonood sa atin na Duterte supporter, or sa channel ko, for example, Isko supporter or Bongbong supporter. So why should they include Chel Diokno dun sa kanilang listahan ng mga iboboto?
Bakit ikaw ay senator para sa lahat ng Pilipino regardless ng kanilang ideology?
Like for example, sa channel ko, Attorney Chel, maraming mga base ni Isko Moreno. So why should we include Chel Diokno dun po sa aming senator na iboboto?
Salamat, Mark. Sa loob ng 30 taon na ako'y nagbibigay ng libreng serbisyong legal sa mga nangangailangan, hindi ako namimili ng kliyente. So kahit sila ay maka-Isko o maka-Manny Pacquiao o kahit sino pa o kung ano man ang kanilang politika, wala akong paki doon. Ang pakikulang ay kailangan ng hustisya ng lahat ng Pilipino. At yan ang dadalhin ko sa Senado. Palagay ko, tama, nagsawa na tayo doon sa mga sobrang divisiveness ba dito sa atin na kaysa ganito ka, dilawan ka, pulahan ka, kung ano-ano ka pa. Tama na yan. Kailangan magsasama-sama na tayo para maangat ang buhay ng lahat. Kasi total, yun naman ang gusto natin lahat eh.
Kaya Attorney Chel, hindi ka nag-pink or dilaw or naka-Tiffany blue. Ano ba yung kulay ulit ni Attorney Chel? Is it parang periwinkle or yung pala Tiffany blue or something? Kasi nakita ko yung ibang campaigns nyo na kahit kasama niyo yung ibang group na may certain color, kayo stand out kayo kasi iba yung suit niya. Can you tell us about that? Is that a statement? Is that your ideological outlook? How is it?
Well, I think it's a reflection of who I am. I have always considered myself as my own man, and I make my own decisions, and I just don't go with the crowd. You know, whatever I think is right, regardless of whether it's popular or not. At one thing I inherited from my mom and my dad was you have to really make sure you never compromise your principles.
Siguro try natin i-wrap up. But before we go, siguro mag-fast talk din tayo, Mark, ng malaman. Sige, papahirapan natin yung content. But before we do a short, siguro fast talk, we'll just say something and tell something. Ano pong gusto niyong gawin pag nasa Senado na kayo? If given the chance, ano yung mga priorities niyo sa Senate? And why do you think it will be huge impact at malaking tulong sa ating taong bayan? Lalo-lalo na sa panahon ng pandemya.
Well, kailangan natin ng mga batas na talagang makakaangat ng buhay ng ordinaryong mamamayan. Yung isa ko gustong isulong halimbawa ay mag-pass tayo ng isang pandemic management law. Kasi nakita natin na imbis na gamitin ng siyensya, gamitin ng mga expert natin sa information technology, ang naging approach ng administrasyon ay kamay na bakal. Ang problema, hindi naman natin kalaban ang armadong sundalo dito sa COVID-19, ang kalaban natin ay virus. Dapat ibigay natin sa mga expert yung nakakaalam sa health, yung nakakaalam sa virus, yung nakakaalam din sa information technology para mapunta na tayo sa new normal. Hindi natin mabubuksan yung ekonomiya, hindi natin maibabalik ang ating kabataan sa eskwela hanggat ganito pa rin ang pag-manage ng pandemic. Kita nyo naman, yung vaccination rate halimbawa, nasa bandang 50% pa lang tayo, samantalang yung ibang bansa, 70%, 80%. Kaya madali na silang mag-new normal. Tayo, hindi pa rin. And these are things that any government, if they took a rational, scientific approach, would have already done.
Public health ang orientation, hindi securitization, no? And Attorney Chel, why is the job of a senator important? Kasi parang minsan feeling ko masyado na-appreciate yung executive, yung mayor, yung presidente, lalo-lalo na sa panahon ni Pangulong Duterte. Pero parang minsan hindi masyado na-appreciate yung trabaho ng legislators, including the senators. Bakit po mahalaga ng trabaho? How can a single senator make a difference in a way that is important for our democracy and the welfare of our people?
Well, first of all, ito hindi yata na ikita ng ibang natin mga kababayan na kung wala ang Senado, kung wala ang Kongreso, wala rin magagawa yung Pangulo. Ang dapat kasi nagsiset ng polisiya, ang nag-establish kung ano yung gagawin, yung tinatawag natin na batas, ay nanggagaling sa Kongreso yan, both the Senate and the lower house. Ang trabaho lang ng Pangulo as Chief Executive ay ipapatupad niya yung batas at yung polisiya na nanggagaling sa Kongreso. Ang nangyayari kasi sa atin ngayon, parang baliktad na wala yon. Basta't may lumabas sa bibig ng Pangulo, kahit walang batas, kahit walang regulasyon, ay gagawin na agad. That's not the way our system is supposed to operate. For centuries, we have been operating under the system na and it has really been effective for us na we have separation of powers. Kaya mahalaga ang Senado dahil sa Senado manggagaling yung mga batas na talagang makakaangat ng buhay ng ordinaryong Pilipino. Hindi lang naman sa batas yun, pati sa foreign policy. Kasi ang Senate ang nagra-ratify halimbawa ng mga treaty.
Treaties.
So may dapat marurunong din ang mga senador pagdating sa foreign relations. At meron din na oversight function ang mga mambabatas para malaman natin kung yung mga napasa ng batas ay talaga bang maayos ang pag-implement niya.
Yung mga IRR lalo na. I mean, I've worked in the legislature and minsan napansin ko, mas madali yung gumawa ng batas pero it's really the implementing rules and regulation and coordinating with the executive branch. Doon yung mahirap, no? Lalo na doon sa issue ng PhilHealth, coverage. It took a long time for us to come up with the IRR. Okay, maraming salamat, Attorney.
Thank you very much po.
So much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mark.
Folks, Attorney Chel is running for the Senate and I think anyone who looks at his credentials on the paper would be impressed. But I hope after this interview and also watching his other interview, nakita niya yung human side niya. Nakita na totoo siya. Ito, real talk, no? Real talk na nagkaroon tayo. So thank you so much, Attorney Chel, for shedding light on the most pressing issue in the country, which is justice. So maraming salamat for joining us, sir. And we hope that we can catch up also in the future. And who knows, maybe in the Senate tayo mag-catch up in the future and we'll interview you on your advocacies. God bless po. God bless Pilipinas. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Paalam. Thank you.